I need you to listen to me very carefully, because the man trying to get into room 14 right now is the reason your son has been hiding for 12 years. When night shift nurse Marisol Vega recognizes a rare internal tattoo on her dying, unidentified patient, she makes a call that no rulebook ever prepared her for. Straight to the president of the Hells Angels. What she doesn't know is that the man already inside the hospital posing as a concerned relative is the same man who made everyone believe this patient had been dead for over a decade. Caught between medical protocol, a grieving father with no reason to trust her, and a predator wearing the face of loyalty, Marisol has one advantage. She has spent her entire career learning to read what people are trying to hide. This is the story of a single night shift that will cost her everything she built and give her something she never planned for. The ambulance bay doors blew open at 11:47, and Marisol Vega was already moving before the paramedics finished shouting. Male approximate age, mid-30s, motorcycle versus guardrail on the I-17 northbound. The first paramedic called out, pushing the gurney at a pace that made the overhead fluorescence strobe across the patient's face. No helmet, no ID, no registration on the bike, blunt abdominal trauma. BP is 80/50 and dropping. GCS 7 at the scene came up to 9 in the rig. Allergies? Marisol asked, matching their stride, her fingers already pressing the call button on the wall panel for the trauma team. Unknown. Everything's unknown. Guy's a ghost. She had worked the night shift at Scottsdale Valley Regional for 6 years, long enough to stop flinching at sentences like that. Unknown was not the same as unimportant. Unknown just meant she had to work harder, read more carefully, build the picture herself instead of receiving it pre-assembled. They pushed through the trauma bay doors, and Marisol began her initial assessment with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that efficiency was a form of compassion. Airway patent. Breath sounds diminished on the left. Possible pneumothorax or internal bleeding tracking upward. Abdomen rigid, which meant the blunt trauma had done what blunt trauma at highway speeds tends to do. His color was ash gray beneath the road grime, and there was a laceration above his left brow that had bled freely and then slowed, which told her his pressure was low enough that even a scalp wound had stopped performing properly. Dr. Renata Ochoa arrived 40 seconds after the page assessed, in another 30, and started calling orders with the clipped authority of a trauma surgeon who had stopped being impressed by chaos sometime around her 3rd year of residency. 2 large-bore IVs type and cross, CT abdomen and pelvis stat. Keep him moving. Marisol worked alongside the tech, cutting away the patient's jacket, a heavy, worn leather thing, the kind that had seen years of road, rather than the kind bought to look like it had. Beneath it, a gray thermal shirt soaked through on the left side, with blood that had dried to brown at the edges and remained darkly wet at the center. She cut through that too, methodically careful around the wound sites, and then she stopped. Not because the bleeding surprised her, not because of the injuries, which were serious but survivable if they moved fast enough. She stopped because of the tattoo. It covered his left shoulder and curved down toward the upper arm, an eagle rendered in dense, meticulous black line work. The kind of tattoo that had taken multiple sessions and real money, and someone who knew exactly what they were doing with a needle. The wings were spread at an angle she recognized the specific angle of the Hells Angels' death's head design that had been visible on enough patients, enough family members in waiting rooms, enough news photographs over the years that she knew the general shape, the way she knew the shape of a caduceus. But this was not the general shape. The line work on the primary image was correct in all the ways a public-facing patch would be: the proportions, the style, the weight of the ink. What was different was the small secondary element worked into the base of the design, so integrated into the shading that it would read as shadow to anyone not looking for it specifically. A set of lines that formed if you knew what you were looking for a specific symbol. Angular, deliberate, the kind of mark that served as internal identification rather than external display. Marisol knew what she was looking for because she had seen it before. Once. 4 years ago, on a different shoulder belonging to a different man who had not survived his visit to this hospital. Her brother's friend. A man named Victor who had come in with 2 gunshot wounds after something went wrong at a gathering she had never gotten a clear account of, and who had died on the table while she held the door for the surgical team. She had seen the same secondary mark in the same position and had looked it up afterward in the way that people who have witnessed something frightening sometimes feel compelled to understand the architecture of the thing that frightened them. She had found just enough to know that the mark indicated founding-level membership, not rank in the conventional sense, lineage, a specific internal designation that was not public and was not common. She photographed it with her personal phone. She did it quickly in the space between one set of vital checks and the next, with the camera angled to capture the full tattoo design and the secondary mark clearly. It was a violation of patient privacy policy. She knew that when she did it. She did it anyway, because something in her chest had gone very still and very focused in the way it did when she was standing at the edge of a decision that could not be undone in either direction. The patient's name, per the paramedic report, was unknown. He had no wallet, no phone, no emergency contact card, no identifying documents of any kind. The motorcycle he had been riding was registered to an LLC that the paramedics' dispatch check had returned as inactive. He was, by every official metric, no one. But that tattoo said he was someone very specific, and the person who needed to know he was here was not, in Marisol's assessment, the administrative coordinator who handled John Doe protocols. They moved him to CT, and she stayed with the flow of the case, monitoring, charting, watching the numbers tick in the wrong direction. And then, after Dr. Ochoa made the call to take him to surgery for internal bleeding, stabilize fractionally. He had a bleed in his spleen and probable liver involvement. He was going to be in the OR for at least 2 hours. He might not come out of the OR. That possibility sat in her awareness the way it always did, present, acknowledged, not allowed to override function. She was charting at the nurse's station at 12:40 when she became aware of the man at the reception desk. He had come in quietly, which was the first thing she noticed. Most people who arrived in the emergency waiting room in the middle of the night came in trailing urgency. They moved fast, or they moved in that terrible, slow way of people whose urgency had collapsed into shock. This man moved at a pace that suggested he had arrived with a specific destination in mind, and saw no reason to advertise the fact. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, wearing a plain, dark jacket over a flannel shirt, and he stood at the reception desk with his hands flat on the counter in a posture that read as patient without reading as anxious. She watched him speak to the night receptionist, Gabriella, who shook her head twice and then reached for the call log to check something. The man nodded. He did not appear upset by whatever Gabriella told him. He stepped back from the counter and positioned himself against the far wall facing the trauma bay corridor. Marisol walked to Gabriella's station as soon as the man had settled. "What did he want?" she asked quietly. Gabriella glanced toward the man and then back. "Says he's a relative of a motorcycle accident patient brought in tonight. Asked about current status, asked if there was a patient matching that description admitted." "What did you tell him?" "That we have a John Doe from an accident on the I-17 that I couldn't confirm or deny further without identification verification, and that if he was a family member, he could speak to the charge nurse." "Did he give you a name?" "His own name." Gabriella checked the pad where she'd written it. Ray Bosch. Said the patient was his cousin." Marisol looked at the man against the far wall. He was not looking at his phone. He was not looking at the other people in the waiting room, the mother with the feverish toddler, the older man holding a cloth to a cut on his forearm. He was looking at the trauma bay corridor with the focused stillness of someone performing patience rather than experiencing it. If he asked to speak to charge, Marisol said, "Send him to me." She went back to her station and sat for a moment without charting. The problem was, this a man with no identity, a tattoo that identified him as someone of specific internal significance to an organization that did not interact with external authorities in conventional ways, was currently in surgery. A man who claimed to be his cousin had arrived at the hospital within 50 minutes of the ambulance, which meant either he had a police scanner, a contact in emergency dispatch, or he had known something was going to happen on the I-17 tonight and had been monitoring for it. None of those three possibilities made him a concerned relative. The patient had gripped her wrist in the trauma bay just for a moment, just before the anesthesia team moved in the brief window when his GCS had bumped up to 10, and he had been close enough to the surface to open his eyes part way. He had looked at her, not through her, and he had said an address. He had said it clearly, and with the specific deliberateness of someone who had been rehearsing saying it, in case they ever got the chance. A storage facility on East Thomas Road, Unit 117. The combination for the lock was 4 digits, and he had said those 4 digits twice before the sedation pulled him back down. She had written the address in her personal notebook, not in the chart. Another violation. She was collecting them tonight like evidence of something she had not yet named. The question she was sitting with was the same question she had been circling since she'd seen the tattoo. Who did she call? The hospital protocol for John Doe patients was clear. Law enforcement notification, social work involvement, administrative processing. She had followed that protocol before for patients far less complicated than this one, and she had watched it work the way a blunt instrument works effectively imprecisely, with considerable collateral damage to the living tissue around the thing it was trying to fix. The specific problem with calling the police on a man whose organizational affiliation was what this patient's appeared to be was that she did not know what the police would do with that information, and she did not know whether the man in the waiting room had connections that would reach that information before it could be useful. What she did know was that the patient had regained consciousness briefly, had looked at her specifically, and had given her a storage address rather than a name or a number to call. That was either a symptom of traumatic confusion, or it was the most important piece of information he knew how to give her in the time he had. She believed it was the second thing. She pulled up a search on her personal phone, not the hospital network, and she worked through it methodically. The Hells Angels Arizona charter had a known leadership structure that was partially a matter of public record, partially a matter of news coverage from federal cases over the past decade. The president of the Arizona chapter was listed in several court documents as Colton Maddox, known as Colt, who had testified in a federal racketeering case 8 years ago and had not been charged. His name appeared in the Phoenix New Times article from 3 years prior about a veteran support ride organized through the chapter. The article included a phone number for a contact person, which was not him, but the contact person's name appeared elsewhere, with a number that appeared elsewhere still. And she worked through the chain of it patiently, the way she worked through a difficult vein, angling in from different directions, until she found the place where the wall was thinnest. She found a number that she believed, with reasonable confidence, was a direct line to someone who could reach Colton Maddox within minutes. She looked at the man against the far wall of the waiting room, who had not moved and had not looked at his phone and was still watching the corridor. She thought about Victor 4 years ago, dying on a table while she held the door. She thought about the rule she had made for herself in the parking lot afterward, that she would not let the machinery of correct procedure become the reason she did not do the thing she knew needed doing. She went to the family consultation room, which was empty, and she closed the door, and she made the call. It rang 4 times. A man's voice answered, rough with sleep and immediate alertness in the way of someone accustomed to calls at this hour mattering. "Yeah. My name is Marisol Vega," she said. "I'm a nurse at Scottsdale Valley Regional. I need to speak with Colton Maddox. I need you to get him on the phone or get me a number where I can reach him directly, and I need it to happen in the next few minutes because I have a patient in surgery right now and a man in my waiting room who I believe is here for reasons that are not the reasons he gave my receptionist." A silence. Then, "Who gave you this number?" "I found it. I'm good at finding things. I need to speak to Maddox." Another silence, longer. Then the line went quiet in the specific way of a phone being held against a chest while someone had a conversation she couldn't hear. Then, "Give me the number you're calling from and stay by your phone." She gave him her personal cell number and went back to the nurse's station, where she charted with one eye on the door to the waiting room and her personal phone sitting screen up on the counter beside her, volume on high. It rang 11 minutes later. "This is Maddox," the voice said. It was not the same voice as before. This one was lower, more controlled, with the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time training himself not to give anything away in his first syllable. "Mr. Maddox?" Marisol said, and she kept her voice at the same level she used when she was telling a family member something they were not going to want to hear. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, because the man trying to get into room 14 right now is the reason your son has been hiding for 12 years. The silence on the other end of the line was the kind that had weight. The silence lasted long enough that Marisol checked her phone screen to confirm the call was still connected. It was. The timer was running. Maddox had not hung up. "Say that again?" he said, finally. She said it again more slowly. She told him about the tattoo. She described the secondary mark in enough detail that by the time she finished, the quality of his breathing on the line had changed in a way she could not name precisely, but could read the way she read changes in a patient's color. Something underneath was shifting. She told him about the man in the waiting room who had arrived too fast and was watching the corridor with too much focus. She did not tell him about the address yet. She was not sure why some instinct that the address was the most valuable piece she had, and she needed to understand who she was giving it to before she put it in another person's hands. "The tattoo," Maddox said. "The mark you're describing. You said it was below the main image, integrated into the shading at the base. It would look like shadow if you weren't looking for something specific. How do you know what to look for?" It was the right question to ask, and she respected him for asking it before he asked anything else. She told him about Victor, briefly, without using the last name, and told him how she had looked it up afterward and what she had found. When she finished, Maddox was quiet again for a moment. "Send me a photograph," he said. "I need an address or an email to send it to." He gave her a cell number different from the one she'd called and said to send it as a text. She put her own call on speaker, set the phone on the counter in front of her, and pulled up the photo she had taken in the trauma bay. The image was clear. She had good hands, and she had taken it in adequate light, and the tattoo was fully visible with the secondary mark readable. She sent it to the number he'd given her. She heard on the call the faint sound of a notification on his end, then nothing for almost a full minute. She waited. She watched the waiting room through the window. Ray Bosch had moved from his position against the far wall and was now standing closer to the corridor entrance, speaking to Gabriella again. Gabriella was shaking her head again, but with the slightly more defensive posture of someone who was running out of easy deflections. "Mr. Maddox," Marisol said. "I'm here." His voice was different now. Not softer exactly, denser, like something had been compressed into a smaller space. "The man in your waiting room. Describe him." She did. Approximate age, 50, broad build, dark jacket, flannel, the specific flatness of his affect, the way he watched without appearing to watch. Another silence. "You said he gave his name." "Ray Bosch. He said the patient was his cousin." The sound Maddox made was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a person makes when something confirms a fear they had not fully allowed themselves to have yet. Low, involuntary, controlled almost immediately. "How long until you can keep him away from the patient without it escalating?" he asked. "Currently, the patient is in surgery, so access is restricted regardless. When he comes out, he'll go to a recovery bay and then a room. Hospital policy allows me to restrict non-verified visitors from accessing critical patients, but I can only hold that for so long before the administration gets involved. If Bosch pushes hard enough, gets a manager involved, claims he has family status, I may not be able to maintain the barrier through official channels alone. How long do I have? Surgery will run at least another hour, probably 90 minutes. After that, recovery is typically 45 minutes to an hour before room transfer. So between 2 and 2.5 hours from now before the situation becomes more complicated. I can be there in 70 minutes. She had not been certain until that moment that he was going to come. She had prepared herself for the possibility that he would simply demand she give him the information and let him handle it from a distance. The fact that he was coming changed the calculus of the next 2 hours significantly. It meant she had a specific window to maintain a specific arrival, to work toward a defined endpoint, rather than an open-ended holding action. "When you arrive," she said, "come to the main entrance and ask for me by name. Don't go to the ER bay. Don't interact with Bosch if you see him." "Understood." A pause. "Ms. Vega?" "Yes?" "If you're wrong about the tattoo—" "I'm not," she said. Not because she was arrogant, but because she had looked at the image on her phone 3 times since sending it, and she was certain. "But if I am, you come to a hospital and leave a hospital, and no harm is done. If I'm right, and you don't come, the man in the waiting room gets into that recovery bay eventually, and the patient doesn't wake up." She ended the call and gave herself 15 seconds. She pressed both palms flat against the counter, felt the cool laminate surface breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way she coached anxious patients to do. Because the technique worked, regardless of who was using it. Then she went to handle Ray Bosch. He had convinced Gabriella to call the charge nurse, which meant Marisol was already expected when she pushed through the door to the waiting room. Bosch saw her coming with that same quality of focused attention, and he rearranged his face into an expression of appropriate family concern that was assembled rather than felt. She had seen enough grief, enough real fear, enough genuine desperation in this waiting room over 6 years that the assembled version registered immediately and clearly. "You must be the charge nurse," he said. His voice was even and warm and practiced. "Ray Bosch. I called earlier about my cousin, Marcus. He doesn't have a last name on file since he came in as a John Doe, but I can confirm his identity if you'll let me provide it." "Mr. Bosch," Marisol said, "I appreciate you coming in. Can I ask how you learned about the accident?" "Scanner app," he said smoothly. "Old habit. You pick those things up when you spend enough time worrying about someone in a line of work like Marcus does." He let the vagueness of that sit neither explaining nor expanding, and watched to see what she did with it. "I understand," she said. "Unfortunately, our unidentified patients is that we need verification through official channels before we can confirm whether a specific patient matching a description is in our care. That's to protect our patients' privacy and safety. If you can provide a government-issued ID and documentation of your relationship to the person you're looking for, we can begin the verification process." "That's going to take a while," he said, even still warm. "It does take some time, yes. We also have social services staff we can involve to help expedite family verification when it's urgent." "Is he alive?" Bosch asked. The warmth dropped out of his voice for just a fraction of a second on the question. Not long enough for most people to catch. Long enough for her. "I'm not able to confirm or deny whether any specific individual is in our care until the verification process." "I understand the policy," he said, and the warmth was back, smooth and immediate. "I'm just asking as a worried family member. Is whoever you have in there alive right now?" "I would encourage you to start the verification process," Marisol said. "And in the meantime, our waiting room has seating, and the coffee machine was restocked an hour ago. Someone from the patient relations team will come speak with you." She turned and went back through the door before he could find another angle. She called the patient relations on-call coordinator Sandra Marsh, who was technically off-site but available by phone, and explained that they had a potential John Doe family member in the waiting room, whose verification she needed to run through proper channels slowly and thoroughly. She used the word thoroughly twice. Sandra, who had worked with Marisol long enough to hear an italicized word for what it was, said she understood and would make sure the process was conducted with appropriate care. Then Marisol went back to her patients. She had 4 others to manage during the night shift, none of them critical tonight, but all of them real. All of them needing her to be present, and she rotated through them with her full attention, because that was what they deserved, and because she had learned early in her career that the instinct to let routine care slide during a crisis was the instinct most likely to create the next crisis. At 1:42 in the morning, she was in the hallway outside room 7 when her phone buzzed with a text from the number she didn't have saved. Coming in the main entrance, 2 men with me, no weapons. We understood the conditions when you explained them. She texted back. 3 minutes. Ask for Vega at the desk. She had 3 minutes to make a decision about something she had been circling for the past hour. The storage address. The combination. The thing the patient had given her in what might have been the last clear moment of consciousness he would ever have. She had not told Maddox about it on the phone. Now he was walking through the front door of her hospital, and she was going to be standing in front of him. And the question was whether she handed that address to a man she had spoken to twice and knew nothing about except that his voice had compressed when she described his son's tattoo. She thought about what the patient had done. He had been on a gurney, sedated, bleeding internally, GCS, climbing and falling and climbing again, and in the window, when he had surfaced enough to speak, he had chosen to give an address to a hospital nurse rather than a name. That meant he had either known or believed that giving a name to anyone right now was dangerous, that the address was safer than a person, that information stored physically rather than in a contact or a phone was the only thing he trusted enough to pass on. She would not give the address to Maddox tonight. Not yet. She would give him what she had given her: the photograph, the presence of Ray Bosch, and the fact of his son being alive. The rest she would hold until she understood the shape of the room. Colton Maddox was taller than she had constructed him in her head, which was her own fault for constructing anything. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, lean but not slight, with the particular build of someone who had been physically capable for a very long time and had maintained it with the same lack of ceremony that other men maintained their cars. Not for aesthetics, out of function. His face was weathered in the specific way of outdoor time rather than age, and his eyes, when they found her as she came through the main entrance lobby, were gray-green and completely level. The 2 men with him were larger and younger, and stood in the specific way that suggested they were accustomed to positioning themselves between Maddox and whatever the room contained. Marisol noted this and filed it. "Ms. Vega," Maddox said. He did not extend his hand. He was reading her the way she was reading him, which she appreciated. "Mr. Maddox, thank you for coming quickly." She kept her voice the same register she used with family members in difficult circumstances, direct, not clinical, not artificially soft. "I can take you to a family consultation room where we can speak privately. The patient is still in surgery. There will be no access to him until he's in recovery, and I'll need to be present for that conversation." "Understood," he said, and followed her. She took them to the large consultation room, not the small one, partly because 3 men and Marisol required the space, and partly because the large consultation room had a second door that opens to a side corridor rather than the main hallway, which gave her more options for managing the physical geography if Bosch became an issue. She sat across from Maddox. His 2 companions stood near the main door. Nobody asked them to sit. She set her phone on the table with the photograph visible on the screen and slid it toward him. He looked at it for a long time. Not the primary design, he had already processed that from the text image. He was looking at the secondary mark, and the quality of his attention had shifted into something that was not quite grief and not quite fury, but existed in the space between them where a man keeps the things he has not allowed himself to feel yet. "Where exactly was this?" he said. Not a question inflection, more like a man confirming coordinates. "Left shoulder, upper arm. The secondary mark is here." She pointed to the area on the photograph. "Integrated into the shading below the left wing." "He had it done when he was 22, Maddox said. He was talking to himself as much as to her. "That was the year he was brought in as a full member. The secondary mark was my addition to the design. I had it put on mine first. He wanted to match it." He picked up her phone, looked at it from a slightly different angle, set it back down. "His name is Damon Maddox." "The man in the waiting room," Marisol said. "Bosch. He said Damon was his cousin." "Ray Bosch has been my vice president for 14 years. He said it flatly, without preamble. Damon died 12 years ago. Or I was told he did. Ray brought me the news. Marisol let that information arrange itself. Who verified it? Ray handled the arrangements. There were circumstances that made the standard process. He stopped. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I trusted him to handle it. I had reasons to trust him. I thought I had reasons. And now he's in your waiting room, she said gently but directly, because she thought he needed to hear the sentence said in plain words. Within 50 minutes of your son being brought to this hospital following an accident on a highway. Maddox looked at her for a moment. What scanner app pulls an accident location in under 50 minutes at midnight and routes it to a specific person? None that work that way, she said, which is what I thought too. She watched him sit with that. He was a controlled man. She could see the infrastructure of it, the practice of containment that was built into how he occupied space, how he modulated his voice, how his hands rested on the table without tension, even when his eyes were doing something else entirely. It was not coldness. It was the opposite of coldness. Actually, it was what happened to heat when it had nowhere safe to go, and had been redirected inward for long enough to become structural. How bad is he? Maddox asked. She told him, honestly. Splenic injury requiring surgical intervention, probable liver involvement, significant blood loss at the scene. But he had been GCS-9. In the ambulance had surfaced briefly before surgery, and the surgical team was experienced. The numbers were serious, and the outcome was uncertain, but he had arrived alive, and he had remained alive through the initial assessment, and she had no information suggesting he was not still alive now. She watched something move through Maddox's face that he did not let reach the surface. He looked at the table. He looked at the photograph on her phone. He did not look at his hands. I want to see him, he said. When he's out of surgery, I'll come and get you. She paused. Mr. Maddox, the man in the waiting room. I've bought time with the verification process, but he's going to escalate. He's patient, which makes him more difficult to manage, not less, because he's not going to make a scene that gives me grounds to involve security. He's going to work the system from the inside until he finds a gap. How long before he finds the gap? If he came in with a plan, which I believe he did, then he's probably already identified that the administrative coordinator for John Doe patients gets involved around the 2-hour mark and often overrides nursing judgment on visitor access when a person presents credible family status documentation. I bought time by requesting thorough verification, but by 3:30 or 4, there's a real chance he has enough of a foot in the process to get access. What do you need from me? Nothing that crosses a line I can't walk back from professionally. I need you to be a verified, legitimate visitor when the time comes. I need documentation that Damon Maddox is your son. Birth certificate, anything official. And I need you to understand that if Bosch gets access before that documentation is in place, I may not be able to prevent it through nursing authority alone. Maddox had already taken out his phone. He was texting someone. Documentation will be here in 40 minutes, he said. Digital copies in 20. She nodded. One more thing. When he came in, Damon, he regained consciousness briefly before surgery. She watched Maddox's face. He was coherent enough to speak. He chose to give me specific information. Maddox looked at her. What kind of information? I'm not ready to share that yet, she said. Not because I'm withholding it to leverage you, because I'm not sure yet what the right shape of sharing it is, and I think getting that wrong could cost us something significant. The two men near the door shifted almost imperceptibly. Maddox studied her for a long moment, the gray-green eyes doing something careful and thorough. All right, he said. It was not agreement exactly. It was more like a provisional ceasefire with someone he had decided was worth the provisional part. I'll come back when surgery is done, Marisol said, standing. Don't leave this room without telling me first, and don't approach Bosch. She went back to her station. At the end of the hallway, through the window, she could see the waiting room. Ray Bosch was seated now, his hands folded in his lap, his posture relaxed, his face perfectly neutral. He was looking at his phone, but only in the way someone looks at a prop. His attention was somewhere else. She went back to her other patients. She checked vitals, adjusted a drip, answered a call light for the gentleman in room 3 who had a question about his discharge paperwork that turned out to be 2 questions and then a third. She was present for all of it, with her full professional attention. Her personal phone was in her scrubs pocket. She felt it against her hip, the way she had learned to feel the things she was carrying, aware of the weight without being pulled sideways by it. At 2:51, her pager went off. Surgery. Dr. Ochoa's number. She was at the surgical suite doors in 3 minutes. "He's out," Ochoa said. Spleen repair, liver laceration closed. Blood loss was significant. He took 4 units intraoperatively. He's holding pressure now. We're looking at a long recovery, but structurally, if he doesn't develop complications in the next 48 hours, he has a real shot. She paused, looking at Marisol with the specific look of a surgeon who had noticed something. "You look like you've been running a problem in parallel." "Always," Marisol said. "The John Doe we just closed on. You know something. I'm working on it." Ochoa studied her for another second. "Keep me in the loop if it becomes a safety issue in my unit. You'll be my first call." She went to the consultation room and knocked once before opening the door. Maddox was on his feet before she finished her first sentence. She told him Damon was out of surgery. She told him the numbers. She watched his chest expand with a breath that was too careful to be ordinary, and she gave him the space of it without commentary. "Recovery," she said when he had processed enough to hear her again. 45 minutes to an hour before they move him to a room. I can take you to the recovery bay waiting area now, which puts you closer and gets you away from the main waiting room." "Bosch," Maddox said, "is still in the main waiting room. The verification process Sandra is running him through should keep him occupied for at least another hour. If he escalates or requests management involvement, I'll be notified." She paused. "Did the documentation come through?" Maddox's phone appeared in his hand. He turned the screen toward her. A scanned birth certificate, a photograph of a framed photo that she suspected had lived in his house for 20-some years, and a text chain with someone named Petra that included the digital copies of both. "The originals will be here by 4, he said. "That should be enough for the verification coordinator." She looked at the birth certificate. Damon Ray Maddox, born June 14th. Mother listed as Kathleen Ann Maddox, née Carol. Father listed as Colton James Maddox. I'll have Sandra cross-reference this against the identifying features we have from intake. "The tattoo," Maddox said. "Among other things. It won't be instant, but it's legitimate documentation, and it'll hold." She put her phone away. "Let's get you to recovery waiting." The recovery bay waiting area was a smaller room off the main post-surgical corridor. Beige walls and chairs, upholstered in the particular shade of sage green that hospital designers had chosen sometime in the 90s and never fully moved on from. Maddox's 2 companions, she had gathered their names, were Ike and Torres. Though nobody had formally introduced them, had settled into a posture that was simultaneously relaxed and alert, the practiced equilibrium of men accustomed to long waits in uncertain environments. Maddox stood by the window rather than sitting. He was looking at the parking lot, though she suspected he was not seeing it. 12 years, he said, without turning around. Marisol sat in the chair nearest the door where she could see the corridor. "Yes?" "He'd be 34 now." A pause. 35 in June. "He looked healthy," she said. "Before the accident. Well-maintained. No signs of chronic illness or long-term substance issues. Whatever he's been doing for 12 years, he's been taking care of himself." Maddox turned from the window then, and the quality of his face was different, in the way that faces change when a person stops managing them for a moment. Not broken, stripped, like the thing underneath was older and more honest than the surface. He went into the organization at 19. He had his mother's sense of what was right and wrong, which made certain parts of the life difficult for him. "We argued about that." He stopped. "That's not the point. You don't have to tell me. I'm not telling you because I have to." He sat down finally across from her. His elbows came to rest on his knees, and he looked at the middle distance between them. A week before I got the news about him, there was an incident. Someone was hurt. Someone outside the organization, a civilian, at a gathering that Ray was running. Ray told me the situation was handled, that it was an accident, that the person involved had been taken care of financially. He paused. Damon was at that gathering. He came to me the next day, and he had a different account of what happened. Marisol kept her face and body neutral. She was listening in the way she listened during a hard conversation, giving full attention without pulling the speaker forward faster than they were ready to move. "I should have listened harder," Maddox said. "I told him I trusted Ray's account. I told him he hadn't seen the full picture." We argued. He left, angry. A week later, Ray came to me and told me Damon had been killed in an altercation out of state, that it had been fast and they'd handled the arrangements. He looked at the window again. I went to see the grave. There was a grave. I believed it. The silence in the room was the kind that pressed against the walls. "He needed you to believe it," Marisol said. "That's why there was a grave." Yes. Maddox's voice was entirely even and entirely terrible. That's becoming clear to me. She thought about what to tell him. She went through it carefully, the way she planned a hard conversation with a patient family before walking into a room, deciding what the person needed to know in what order and what could wait without causing harm. The storage address was still hers. She was not ready to give it up yet. But there was something else she had been holding, something smaller and more immediate that she thought he might need. "When Damon came around before surgery," she said, "he said a name, just one name, and it was short. I almost missed it because his speech was impaired, but he said it clearly enough. He said, 'Ray.' And then he said, 'Don't let him in.'" Maddox absorbed this. His hands, which had been resting open on his knees, closed very slowly into loose fists and then opened again. He knew. He knew Ray would come. He expected it, which means he has been living with the knowledge that Ray would eventually find him, and he came back here to Arizona, I assume, with some preparation for that. Why would he come back? "I don't know," she said honestly. But he came back, and he wasn't hiding, or he wasn't hiding completely. He was riding on a highway at midnight, without a helmet or identification, which is either a failure of preparation or a deliberate choice, and I don't know which. Maddox looked at her for a long moment. "You're very careful with what you say." "It's the job. You say the wrong thing at the wrong time in this work, and it costs someone something real." "Same job," he said, and there was something almost wry in it, though it didn't reach humor. He looked at the door. "Bosch has been with me since before Damon was born. We grew up in the same neighborhood in Tempe. I've trusted him with things I've never trusted anyone else with." "People exploit the people who trust them most," Marisol said, not unkindly. "They choose those people specifically because the trust is load-bearing." Maddox's phone lit up on the chair arm beside him. He glanced at the screen. Something shifted in his expression, fast controlled. He picked up the phone and read the message. "One of my people in the waiting room," he said quietly, and she had not noticed when he had put someone in the main waiting room, but she should have anticipated it. "Bosch just received a phone call." He stepped outside to take it. "How long ago?" 30 seconds. She was already standing. She went to the door and looked into the corridor, then back. "I need to check the main entrance. Stay here." "Ms. Vega, please," she said, and there was enough weight in it that he stayed. She moved quickly down the corridor and through the connecting hallway to the main entrance, where Gabriella was now handing off to the night-to-morning transition receptionist, a young man named Patrick, and where the main entrance doors were showing the first gray suggestion of a phoenix morning beginning at 4:40 a.m. beyond the glass. Through the glass, she could see Ray Bosch on the sidewalk, phone to his ear, his back half-turned to the entrance. She could not hear him. She could read the shape of the conversation and the tension of his shoulders, the very slight forward lean of someone receiving information that required adjustment rather than simply acknowledgement. He turned toward the entrance while still on the call, and she stepped back out of the line of sight from the doors and stood just inside the corridor. He finished the call. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, his phone at his side, looking at something she couldn't see. Then he came back through the main entrance doors with the same even pace as before. But the pace was different now, in a way that was difficult to articulate. The same tempo, the same casual bearing, but with a purpose underneath it that hadn't been as visible before. He went directly to the reception desk. Not the waiting room, the desk. "I need to speak with the charge nurse," he said to Patrick, and his voice was still warm, still even. "And I need to speak to whoever is on duty from patient administration. I have documentation confirming I'm immediate family for your John Doe patient, and I'm prepared to verify it." Marisol walked to the desk. "I'm the charge nurse," she said. "What kind of documentation?" Bosch looked at her with an expression of pleasant, professional engagement that had been constructed with considerable skill. "I made some calls," he said. "Got some things together faster than I expected. I have a notarized affidavit of family relationship and a copy of a shared utility account from 3 years ago with my cousin's name on it. I also have the contact information for the attorney who handled our grandmother's estate, who can speak to the family relationship." The utility account was a good move. She had not expected him to have that ready. The notarized affidavit was faster than it should have been possible to produce in the middle of the night, which meant it had been prepared in advance, which meant he had expected to need it, which meant he had known there was a possibility his access would be challenged. "I'll need to review the documents and consult with patient administration," she said. "That process typically takes an hour at minimum." "Of course," he said. "I'm not trying to rush anyone. I just want to make sure I'm doing this the right way." He handed her a neat folder, physical paper printed and organized with the documents inside. She took the folder. She looked at the documents with appropriate attention. She kept her face entirely level. Then her personal phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it without showing the screen to Bosch, angling her body fractionally. A text from Maddox's number. "He's made a call. Someone's coming. How long until Damon is in a room?" She texted back under the counter, 30 to 45 minutes. Then she went to the internal phone and called Sandra's cell, which Sandra answered on the second ring, clearly already awake. "I need you to find a reason," Marisol said very quietly, her back to the waiting room. "Why the documentation that just came in needs secondary review." An escalating review process. "I need another 45 minutes. "Is this a safety situation?" Sandra asked. "I believe it may become one." "I need something to document." "Document that the notarized affidavit has a date discrepancy." She looked at the document. The notarization date was from 2 months prior. "The document is predated by 2 months. We don't know what it was originally prepared for." A brief silence. "That'll work," Sandra said. "I can run a secondary review and flag the date discrepancy for clarification." She hung up and went back to the nursing station where she made a show of logging the documents into the system, and then returned to the consultation room where she had left Maddox. But when she pushed the door open, the room had changed. Ike and Torres were still near the door, but their body language had tightened. Maddox was on his feet, and the reason was in the room with him. A nurse from the recovery bay, a young man named Greg, who was doing his residency rotation, was standing just inside the door, with the specific look of someone who had just delivered news that had surprised him as much as anyone. "He's awake," Maddox said when he saw her. "He shouldn't be," she said, and she was already turning back into the corridor because Damon Maddox had absorbed 4 units of blood and come out of surgery less than an hour ago. And if he was awake and agitated, that was either a medical situation or he was more resilient than she had calculated, and he was aware of where he was. She went to the recovery bay. She put on her charge nurse face, calm, authoritative, focused, and she pushed the curtain aside. He was not unconscious. He was not agitated, medically speaking. He was lying with his eyes open, and the look in them was the look of someone who had surfaced through a great deal of medication and pain and difficulty, and had managed to get enough purchase to hold on. He turned his head toward her when she came in, and she saw the recognition in his face, the specific recognition of someone who had seen her once, briefly, before the darkness. "You're the nurse," he said. His voice was rough with intubation and sedation. "From before." "That's right, Marisol Vega. You're in recovery at Scottsdale Valley Regional. Your surgery went well. You need to rest." "Is he here?" Damon said. She did not pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." Something moved through his face. Complicated. Relief and something that was not purely fear but lived next to it. Ray. Also present, held outside visitor access currently. For how long? Long enough. He closed his eyes for a moment. The monitor beside the bed showed his heart rate elevated, but not alarmingly. It would take more than this conversation to destabilize him medically, she thought, and monitoring was her job. He was working through something. She gave him the space. "The address I gave you," he said without opening his eyes. "East Thomas Road. You wrote it down." "I did." "Unit 117, 4-digit code." He opened his eyes. "I need you to go there. Tell me what I'm going to find." 12 years of documentation, he said. "Financial records, statements, photographs, a recorded conversation from a phone I kept specifically for that purpose. Everything that proves what Ray did in 2012, and everything he's done since then to make sure nobody could prove it." He paused for breath. It cost him something. She could see that. "It's what I came back for. I came back to give it to my father. I didn't quite make it here the right way." "What happened on the I-17? The look that crossed his face was wry and tired, and 23 years of difficulty compressed into a single expression. "Car ran me off the road. Didn't get a plate, went by too fast, and I was too busy being airborne." He paused. "That's why I don't have a wallet. I left everything at a hotel. The only thing I had with me was the bike." "Was the accident connected to Ray?" "I don't know. Maybe. He's been looking for me for a while. I've been moving around." He shifted, winced. "The storage unit. Everything is there. But if Ray is in this building and you can only hold him for, how long did you say?" "We're working on it. I need you to go to that storage unit," he said, "before someone else gets there first." She looked at him. He was post-surgical sedated, in pain, and making complete sense, which told her something about the kind of mind he had when functioning, and confirmed what she had already begun to suspect about why he had survived 12 years on his own. "Not yet," she said. "First I'm going to get your father." She saw it happen in his face, the word father landing like a stone dropped from a height, traveling down through all the layers to where the real things lived. He turned his face toward the ceiling. She thought for a moment that he was going to lose the composure he had worked to maintain. "He's here," she said gently. "He came when I called." Damon Maddox, who had spent 12 years alone with the knowledge of what Ray Bosch had done and what it had cost him, pressed his lips together and said nothing. The monitor showed his heart rate climbing 2 beats per minute and then steadying. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, and went to get Colt Maddox. She came back with him alone. No Ike, no Torres, because some rooms didn't need audience. She pushed the curtain aside and stood just at the edge of it, and she gave father and son the first 30 seconds of their seeing each other across an impossible distance of time. Colt Maddox stopped in the doorway. He looked at his son in the recovery bed, and for a moment the infrastructure was entirely gone. No control, no containment, just a man in his 50s looking at a face he thought he had lost, and finding it worn and tired and alive. He crossed the room in 3 strides and put his hand on the side of his son's face without a word. And Damon, who was 34 and had survived alone for a very long time, closed his eyes and allowed it. Marisol went back to the corridor and stood outside the curtain and gave them the time. She was standing there watching the recovery bay when her phone buzzed again. This time it was not Maddox. It was the message from Sandra that she had been anticipating and dreading. Administration has overruled the secondary review on the documentation. VP of Patient Services has approved visitor access for Ray Bosch, effective immediately. She stared at the message. Then another buzz. This one from the number she recognized as Maddox's in-room contact. Bosch is moving toward recovery. He has a hospital volunteer escort. A VP of Patient Services at 4:50 in the morning, overruling a nursing documentation flag. Bosch had made a call outside. Someone was coming. She had understood both those pieces but had not quite assembled them into the specific shape they had now assembled into. Bosch had a contact inside hospital administration. She went back into the recovery bay and said quietly but clearly, "We have about 4 minutes." Both Maddox men looked at her. "Ray has administrative clearance that bypassed my hold. He's coming to this bay now." She looked at Colt. "I need you to step back and let me handle the first interaction. He doesn't know you're here yet. That's an advantage for the next 4 minutes, and then it isn't." Colt looked at his son. Damon gave him a fractional nod that carried a weight of trust she suspected hadn't existed between them 12 years ago and had been rebuilt in the last 5 minutes. Colt stepped back against the wall. Marisol pushed the curtain to the recovery bay mostly closed and positioned herself just inside it so that her figure would be the first thing visible to anyone approaching from the corridor. She heard the footsteps. She heard the voice of the volunteer escort saying, "Just through here," and then she heard it say, "Oh, I should probably check in with the nursing staff first." And then Ray Bosch pulled the curtain aside. He saw her immediately. His face showed the appropriate expression of a worried relative arriving at a loved one's bedside. His eyes moved fast around the visible portion of the room, the bed Damon connected to the monitors Marisol in his direct path. And then something in the periphery stopped him for one fraction of a second. She did not look toward the wall where Maddox was standing. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes on Bosch. "Mr. Bosch," she said, "I'm afraid I'm going to need to ask you to step back outside. The patient is post-operative and—" "I was told I had clearance," he said. "You were given administrative clearance for visitor access during standard hours in a standard room. This is the recovery bay, which has its own visitor protocols, and the patient's attending has not yet signed off on visitor access in this unit." She was making this up in the specific way that nurses who know their hospital's organizational structure can make things up credibly. "I can have that sign-off expedited, but it will take 30 minutes. Bosch looked past her at the bed. His eyes moved over Damon's face, and she watched him process what he saw, alive, sedated, connected to monitors, breathing. Then his eyes moved to the left and found Colton Maddox. The room went very still. "Colt," Bosch said. The warmth had dropped out of his voice entirely, the way a mask drops when the person wearing it has decided it's no longer useful. What was left was not fear, exactly. It was the specific quality of a man reassessing the geometry of a room. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting my son," Maddox said from the wall. Bosch's jaw moved. Once. "Your son died 12 years ago." "No," Maddox said. "He didn't." The silence was the length of a breath. Then Bosch looked back at Marisol, and she saw it. A flicker, fast and controlled, and she understood that this was the moment when the calculation in his head had shifted from managing access to managing exposure. "I need you to leave the recovery bay, Mr. Bosch," she said. "Now." He looked at Maddox one more time. Then he turned and walked out of the recovery bay with his even, patient pace, and she listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor. Her phone was already in her hand. She texted Maddox's contact number. "Bosch is leaving recovery. Track him. Do not confront. Tell me where he goes." Then she looked at Colt Maddox, who was already looking at her. "He's going to move faster now," he said. "Yes," she said. "And so are we." Her phone buzzed a text from a number she didn't know, with a Phoenix message app sender tag, anonymous. 6 words. "Back off. You don't know what you started." She showed it to Maddox. He read it. His expression did not change. "Was that sent to your phone?" he asked. "Yes, my personal number." Which meant Bosch, or someone working with Bosch, had her number. She had called Maddox's contact from her personal phone. The chain of access was not hard to trace from there. She was aware for the first time, with a clarity she hadn't allowed before, that she was no longer a bystander in this situation, who had made a cautious call from the edges of a problem. She was inside it now. Her number was in someone's phone. Her name was on the badge above her breast pocket. She put her personal phone back in her scrubs pocket and pulled out the hospital phone and called security. Security posted a guard in the corridor outside the recovery bay, which was the extent of what the hospital security infrastructure could do in the short term. And Marisol was honest with herself about what that meant. A guard in a corridor was a deterrent and a documentation measure. It was not a wall. It was not a guarantee. She went through what she had. Damon was post-operative stable and now awake enough to speak in short windows between the pain medication pulling him back. Colt Maddox was in the recovery bay, legally established as next of kin, with documentation that Sandra's process had confirmed was legitimate, even if the timing of its production was unusual. Ray Bosch was somewhere in the hospital, or outside it, and the warmth had gone out of his performance when he'd seen Colt, which meant his calculation had changed. She needed the storage unit. She knew it. She had known it since Damon had said 12 years of documentation, in the specific tone of someone describing something they had built the way other people build escape routes, carefully, incrementally, over a very long time, with the knowledge that the moment of using it would be the most dangerous moment of the entire construction. The question was not whether she should go. The question was the cost. She stood at the nursing station and worked through it with the same methodical attention she brought to a difficult clinical situation. Patient privacy law protected patient-disclosed information. She was a mandatory reporter, yes, but the storage address was not a reportable situation. It was the personal property of an adult patient who had asked her to retrieve it. The question was whether her doing so constituted a violation of any professional boundaries significant enough to cost her her license. The honest answer was possibly. The more complete answer was possibly, depending on how it was reviewed after the fact, by whom, and in what context. She had made a rule for herself after Victor. The rule was that she would not let the fear of professional consequences become the mechanism by which she chose wrong action. She had watched herself make that choice once, had watched herself comply with a gatekeeper process while a man died on the other side of the gate, and she had carried it in a specific place in her chest ever since, a kind of settled heaviness. Not guilt, exactly, more like a reckoning she had accepted. She thought about that heaviness now. She thought about Damon Maddox, 34 years old, who had spent 12 years collecting evidence of what had been done to him and had come back to Arizona to deliver it to his father, and had instead ended up intubated in a surgical bay. She called the agency that provided night shift floats and got a charge nurse to cover her floor for 2 hours. It cost her a marker she had been saving for a difficult stretch in August, and she spent it without negotiating. She called Colt Maddox's number. He answered before the first ring finished. She told him she was going to the storage facility. She told him why and what she expected to find, and that she needed him to stay in the hospital. "I should come with you," he said. "No," she said. "If something happens here while you're gone, you're the only person in this building with enough authority and legitimate standing to keep Damon safe. I need you here more than I need you with me." A pause. "And I need to do this part alone." A brief silence. "All right." She went back to the recovery bay and stood at the edge of the curtain. Damon was awake marginally, fighting the medication in the specific way of someone who had trained themselves to resist going under, because going under had costs. "I'm going to the storage unit," she said quietly. He opened his eyes fully. "Unit 117, Thomas Road. Lock code 4279. "That's what you told me before." "Say it back," he said. She said it back. "Black duffel bag on the lower shelf," he said. "Everything's in waterproof bags inside it. Don't put it down anywhere on the way back. Don't stop the car." He paused. "There's a USB drive in a plastic case clipped inside the duffel. That's the recorded conversation. That's the most important piece." "What's on the recording?" Ray talking to someone in 2012 about what happened to the woman who was killed at the gathering, and talking about what he was going to do about Damon, who had been causing problems about it. His voice was measured and careful, with the quality of someone who had rehearsed this summary against the day when they would have limited time to say it. He didn't know he was being recorded. I was in the next room. I had left my phone recording. I left Arizona the next day, and I've had that recording on 12 different storage devices in the 12 years since. Marisol absorbed this. Does your father know what happened at the gathering? The details? He knows something happened. He believes the version Ray told him. A pause. Ray told him it was an accident. The recording makes clear it wasn't. She thought about Maddox's face in the family consultation room when he had said the word accident, the slight weight he had put on it, the way he had paused at the standard process. He had not believed it entirely. He had chosen to believe it because the alternative required him to accept something about the person he had most trusted that he had not been ready to accept. Okay, she said. I'll be back in an hour. She drove to the storage facility on East Thomas Road in her own car, which she had not moved in 18 hours, and which was cold in the specific way of a Phoenix night in February. Not the brutal cold of other climates, but the dry, clear cold that the desert produces at 4 in the morning, when the day's warmth has had all night to leave. She drove with her hands at 10 and 2, and with the radio off because she needed the quiet of her own thinking. The storage facility was one of the medium-sized, mostly attended to type, with a gated keypad entry and adequate lighting, and the kind of security camera presence that was visible from the outside. She punched in the gate code from the signage. The facility kept a standard entry code posted for after-hours access for renters, and drove through. Unit 117 was on the interior corridor of the middle building. The lock was a combination padlock of the kind that could be found at any hardware store. Nothing remarkable, because remarkable locks attracted attention. She dialed in 4279, and the shackle released. Inside the unit, a twin mattress with a sleeping bag folded on it, a camp stove, a stack of prepaid phone boxes in the corner, a milk crate with instant coffee and protein bars, and on the lower shelf, as specified, a black duffel bag with the top zipped closed. She stood in the doorway of the storage unit and looked at the sleeping bag on the mattress, and she allowed herself, for exactly 4 seconds, to feel the weight of what that meant. A man who had spent time in this unit sleeping on that mattress, living on protein bars and instant coffee, close enough to come back, but not close enough to trust that coming back entirely was safe. Then she picked up the duffel, zipped the unit, snapped the lock closed, and walked back to her car. The bag was heavier than she expected. She put it in the trunk, not the back seat. She drove back to the hospital with the same hands at 10 and 2 attention, and she was 3 minutes from the facility, stopped at a red light on Thomas Road when a car pulled up beside her. She didn't look over immediately. The light was red and there was no reason to look. Then the car beside her moved slightly, just enough in the way of a car that is being moved deliberately into her lane. And she looked. The car was a dark SUV with tinted windows. She could not see who was driving. The light turned green. She moved forward. The SUV moved with her, not exactly beside her, now fractionally behind, in the position that a car takes when it is following rather than simply traveling the same direction. She did not speed up. Speeding up would confirm that she had noticed. She drove at the speed limit for 2 blocks, then made a right turn that was not the most direct route back to the hospital. The SUV followed. She called Colt Maddox. He answered in 2 seconds. "Where are you?" "Thomas Road, heading toward Scottsdale Road." "I have a tail." "Dark SUV. I can't read the plate from this angle." She kept her voice level. "I have the bag." A short pause, the kind where a person is already doing something rather than deciding whether to do it. "Keep moving. Don't stop." "What cross streets?" She gave him the intersection as she passed through it. "I'm sending Torres," he said. "Black truck. You'll see him in about 4 minutes on McDowell. He'll pull in ahead of you. Follow him, not the SUV. I'm not going to do anything that constitutes a traffic incident, she said. Torres is going to drive a very boring straight line to the hospital, Maddox said with a flatness that was the closest thing to humor she had heard from him. No incidents. She drove. The SUV held its position behind her, 3 car lengths, consistent and patient. At the intersection of Scottsdale and McDowell, a black truck with a damaged rear reflector, a specific detail she catalogued, immediately pulled through the green light ahead of her, and she fell in behind it. The SUV maintained position for another block and then gradually fell back. At the next light, it turned left and did not appear in her mirrors again. She exhaled once, slowly, and followed Torres's truck through the hospital complex entrance. She brought the bag directly to the recovery bay. She did not stop at the nursing station. She nodded to the security guard in the corridor and pushed the curtain aside. Maddox was standing exactly where she had left him. He read her face before she could speak. "You had a tail," he said. "Gone now. Torres came out to meet me." She set the bag on the visitor chair. "Damon, are you awake?" He was awake. He had been awake and fighting it the whole time she was gone, probably because he had not fully trusted that she would come back, and she did not fault him for that. She opened the bag. She showed him the contents without removing anything, the way she would show a patient their own chart. "Here is what you gave me. Confirm it's what you intended?" "That's it," he said. She looked at Maddox. "I need 5 minutes with your son, and then I need to show you something." Maddox stepped back. She was learning that he communicated a great deal through the specific quality of his stillness, what it withheld, what it allowed. He stepped back in the way of someone who trusted this would be used correctly, not in the way of someone who had been asked to defer. She sat down in the visitor chair and pulled the waterproof bags from the duffel, one by one, setting them in a line. They were labeled in small, neat printing, years, dates, categories. The discipline of it was extraordinary. This was not the work of someone acting on impulse or anger. This was the work of someone who had decided at 22 years old, with very little except a phone and a recording and the knowledge of what they had witnessed, to build a case over 12 years, alone. She found the USB case clipped inside the duffel lining and held it up. "Is this the recording?" "That's it." She set it apart from the others. Then she looked at Damon. "When he comes back, in your father, I think you need to tell him what happened at the gathering. Not the way it's on the recording, the way you saw it, in your words." Damon was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the USB drive in her hand with an expression that was not grief exactly, but was adjacent the look of something that has been carried for a very long time being set down. "He's going to want to know why I didn't give this to him before I left," he said. "Probably," she said. "You can tell him the truth about that too." "The truth is, I was 22, and I didn't know if he'd believe me over Ray," he said. "The truth is that Ray had been his right hand for longer than I'd been alive, and I was the one who caused problems and argued with him. And I didn't trust that I'd win a word war with someone who had been building credit with my father since before I was born." She held his gaze. "That's a real answer. Give it to him." She got up and held the curtain open. Maddox came back in. She put the USB drive on the shelf beside the bed, within Damon's line of sight. She stepped back to the edge of the curtain. "There's something I need to tell you," Damon said to his father. His voice was rough but clear. "About what happened at the gathering in 2012. About what I actually saw." Marisol stepped out into the corridor and closed the curtain. She stood in the corridor for a moment. The security guard gave her a look that asked whether she needed something. She shook her head. She checked her personal phone. It was 5:43 in the morning. The sky through the window at the end of the corridor was the dark blue that preceded sunrise in Phoenix, the color that the desert gets when it is done being night and not quite ready to admit it. She had been awake for, she counted backward, 23 hours. She was not tired in the way that usually accumulated. She was operating in the specific, alert stillness of a body that has produced enough adrenaline to bypass ordinary fatigue. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different from the one that had told her to back off. This one said, "Meet me in the parking garage, level 2. I know where Bosch went." She stared at it. Then the curtain moved, and Colt Maddox was in the corridor beside her. She showed him the message without speaking. He read it. "Don't go," he said immediately. "I wasn't planning to." She put the phone in her pocket. "But someone is trying to move me out of this building." She looked at him. "Which means whatever is happening next is going to happen here." The words were barely out of her mouth when the security guard at the far end of the corridor straightened and spoke into his radio, and she heard the static response, and her own hospital radio clipped to her collar came alive with a call she recognized as a floor security alert on the post-surgical unit, which was not this unit, but was one floor up. She and Maddox looked at each other for exactly 1 second. "He's not in the parking garage," she said. "He's upstairs," Maddox said. "Looking for which room they're going to transfer him to." She was already moving. She pulled her radio and called the post-surgical nursing station and said, "Do not assign room 14 to any incoming patient until further notice, regardless of what admin says. Lock the room. I will explain in 8 minutes." She used the specific tone that she had been told early in her career sounded like the hospital was behind her, even when only her own judgment was. She took the stairs. The post-surgical floor was 1 flight up, and the stairwell came out near the nursing station, and she went through the door at a fast walk rather than a run, because running in hospital corridors causes 3 additional problems for every 1 it solves. The post-surgical night nurse, Brienne, was at the station with the look of someone who had just handled something unpleasant. "A man came up saying he was checking on the room assignment for his cousin," she said immediately. "He was very calm and polite. He asked which room the patient from surgery was going to, and I told him we didn't have an assignment yet. He said he'd wait. I told him visitors needed to be in the family waiting area, and he said..." She paused. "He said he would be right back." "Where did he go?" "Toward the elevators." "Not the stairs?" Brienne shook her head. She went to the elevator bank. 1 elevator was sitting at the lobby level. 1 was coming up. She watched the indicator light. It stopped at the 2nd floor. The parking garage was accessed from the 2nd floor. She called Maddox. "Your people, Torres, Ike? Where are they right now?" "Torres is in the lobby. Ike is in the lot." "Bosch is going to the parking garage from the 2nd floor. He's not leaving, he's meeting someone." She paused. "Or picking something up." A brief silence. "I'll tell Ike." She went back to the stairwell and down 1 flight and through the 2nd floor corridor to the parking garage door. She pushed it open slowly. The parking garage at 5:50 a.m. was mostly full. The hospital ran round the clock, and the overnight staff had filled the first 2 levels. The fluorescent lighting was the kind that turned everything the color of old paper. She could see 3 rows of cars from the door, and the concrete pillar closest to her had a camera mounted at the top of it, which she noted. She could see between 2 SUVs at the far end of the 2nd row a figure that was not moving, standing, waiting. She did not go forward. She stayed in the doorway. Her phone buzzed. "Ike Bosch is level 2 east corner. Someone came to meet him. Short conversation. Exchange of something. Couldn't see what from the angle. Second person is leaving." She typed back, "Get the plate of the 2nd vehicle." Then she waited. The figure at the far end of level 2 shifted, moved between the cars, and she heard footsteps on concrete. Not coming toward her, going toward the elevator. She pulled back from the doorway and let the door close silently and went to the stairwell. She was at the nursing station for recovery when Ike's text came through. Plate, Arizona. Registered to Harmon Property Group, LLC. She took a photo of the text and sent it to Maddox. 20 seconds later, he called her. "Harmon Property Group is a holding company I know. It's associated with a city council member named Denny Walsh. Walsh has been on our radar for 3 years for contract steering involving city infrastructure deals." A pause. "Ray has been meeting with Walsh's associates for 2 years. I thought it was community relations." "It was an insurance policy," Marisol said. "Yes." His voice was flat and certain. That's what it was. She went back to the recovery bay. She pushed the curtain aside. Father and son had been talking. She could tell from the quality of the air in the room the specific atmosphere of a space where something important has been said and not entirely processed, and is sitting in the air between two people. Damon's face was tired, and the particular tired of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has just set it down in the right place for the first time. She picked up the duffel bag. She removed the USB drive from the shelf. She looked at both of them. "I need to tell you what just happened in the parking garage," she said. "And then we need to decide what we're doing with what's in this bag, because we are running out of time to choose the order of things." She laid it out for them, clearly. The anonymous text, Bosch's movement to the post-surgical floor, the meeting in the parking garage, the plate, the Walsh connection. Damon spoke first. He's trying to consolidate before the documentation surfaces. Walsh has city contacts, legal contacts. If Ray can establish a narrative before we present the evidence, then the evidence gets buried in procedural challenges, Maddox finished. He looked at Marisol. "What do you think?" It was the first time he had directly asked her opinion on strategy rather than logistics. She noted it. "I think we need to get the content of that recording verified and in the hands of someone outside this building before Bosch can move through another layer of the system," she said. "I also think I need to tell you something that I should have told you earlier, and I need to take the professional consequence of having done it." She looked at Maddox. "I violated patient privacy when I photographed the tattoo tonight, and I violated it again when I retrieved items from a storage facility based on a patient-disclosed address. Both of those things are on my record. When this is over, I'm going to have to account for them." Neither Maddox said anything for a moment. "You knew that when you did it," Damon said. "Yes." He looked at his father. Something passed between them, the specific communication of two people who have just recalibrated each other and are still working out the new parameters. "The recording," Maddox said. "Who do we take it to?" "I have someone," Damon said. "I've had someone in mind for 2 years, a federal organized crime unit contact who has been building a case on Walsh's network independently. If this recording reaches them, it connects 2 investigations that have been running in parallel." He shifted, winced. "Her name is Agent Karen Pratt. I have her direct number in the documentation in that bag." Marisol found it. She looked at the clock on the wall. 6:12 a.m. "Then we call her now," she said, "before Bosch has time to make another move." She dialed the number. It rang 3 times, and then a woman's voice, precise and alert. "Pratt, Agent Pratt, my name is Marisol Vega. I'm a registered nurse at Scottsdale Valley Regional. I have a patient in post-operative recovery named Damon Maddox, and I'm standing in the room with him and his father, Colton Maddox. And Damon has asked me to call you directly, because he has documentation relevant to an investigation you're running, and we need to get it out of this building before 6:30 a.m. A brief silence on the line, the silence of a person recalibrating quickly. "I know that name," Agent Pratt said. "Put Damon on the phone." Marisol held the phone to Damon's ear. He said 4 sentences, and the last one was, "It's all in the duffel, and we have a USB recording that puts Ray Bosch in the room and talking." A longer silence. Then, "I can have someone there in 25 minutes. Marisol took the phone back. "We'll be here," she said. She gave the agent the recovery bay unit number and her direct hospital extension. She hung up and looked at the 2 Maddox men. 25 minutes, she said. Damon closed his eyes. The monitor showed his heart rate dropping 2 beats per minute and to something closer to rest. He had been holding the tension of 12 years in a specific set of muscles since she had walked into this recovery bay, and some portion of it had just released. Maddox looked at her. "What do you need from me for the next 25 minutes?" "I need to find Ray Bosch," she said, "and make sure he's still in this building when Agent Pratt arrives." "How?" She thought about it. She thought about the camera on the parking garage pillar and the camera in the recovery bay corridor, and the cameras at the main entrance and the ER bay and every other point of institutional documentation that the hospital maintained as a matter of standard operation. She thought about the timeline she had been building all night without formally calling it a timeline. Every interaction Bosch has had in this building tonight is on hospital cameras, she said. Arrival time position in the waiting room, approach to the reception desk, movement to the post-surgical floor, movement to the parking garage. I have documentation of the time discrepancy on his notarized affidavit. I have documentation of the administrative override that bypassed my nursing flag. I have documentation of an anonymous threatening text sent to my personal phone while he was the only person with a reason to send it. She paused. If he leaves the building before Agent Pratt arrives, that timeline goes to law enforcement with a formal statement from me, regardless. But if he's still here, the case is cleaner. I know how to keep him in a building, Maddox said quietly. Within hospital policy, she said. The ghost of something crossed his face. Within hospital policy, he agreed. He went out to make a call. She stayed with Damon. The recovery bay was quiet, with the specific quiet of a room where everything important has already happened, and what remains is the patience of waiting for it to be confirmed. You're going to lose something over this, Damon said without opening his eyes. Probably, she said. Is that all right? She thought about Victor. She thought about the parking lot afterward and the rule she had made and the 6 years of carrying it in a specific place in her chest. Yes, she said. Agent Karen Pratt arrived in 22 minutes rather than 25, which Marisol noted as the kind of efficiency that indicated this was not a cold case to her. She came with one other agent, and no visible drama, the kind of arrival that looked unremarkable from the outside. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, dark-haired, wearing a jacket over a blouse that suggested she had been at her desk when the call came and had moved quickly without stopping to consider the wardrobe. She read the room in about 4 seconds. Damon in the bed, Maddox standing, Marisol with the duffel, and she went directly to Damon. "How are you doing?" she said. And it was not the way people in positions of authority usually said it in professional situations. It was the way of someone who had been told a person had been living under particular conditions for a long time and actually wanted to know. "Worse than yesterday, better than this time last week," Damon said. "Take the bag." She took the bag. Her partner was already gloved and cataloging contents. She found the USB drive in Marisol's hand and took it last. "The recording is the oldest piece, but the most important," Damon said. "Voice is identifiable. I can put you in contact with an audio forensic specialist who has already done preliminary authentication. She's been holding the analysis for 2 years, waiting for me to tell her it was time." Pratt looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been running a long investigation and just found the piece that connects 2 rooms of evidence they had been unable to link. "You've been building this in parallel," she said. "Since 2013, he said. "I knew the case would need to stand alone, without me as the only witness. So I didn't give it to anyone until I could give it whole." "Why now?" "Because I was 34 in June, and I was done waiting," he said. "And because someone ran me off the I-17, which means the waiting period had ended, whether I chose it or not." Pratt looked at Maddox, a different look taking his measure, reading the situation of what he was in this room, and what he had been to the case she was building. "Colton Maddox," she said. "Yes." "Are you going to be a problem for this process?" "No," he said. The single syllable had enough weight that she appeared to accept it. She turned to Marisol. "You're the nurse who made the call?" "Yes." "And you retrieved the bag from the storage facility?" "Yes." "Based on patient-disclosed information?" "Yes." Pratt looked at her with a quality of attention that was neither sympathetic nor prosecutorial. It was the look of someone mapping a factual situation. "You understand your hospital administration is going to want to have a conversation with you?" "I'm aware." "And you did it anyway?" "I did it anyway." Pratt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The timeline of events from last night. Every camera position, every logged interaction, every documented communication. I'm going to need all of it." "I've been compiling it since 3 a.m., Marisol said. "I can have a written account to you within the hour. I also need the anonymous text messages from your personal phone." She had anticipated this. "You'll have them." Pratt nodded once and looked back at the duffel. "The man Bosch, where is he currently?" "As of 6 minutes ago, in the main waiting room," Marisol said, "where Maddox's people have been running interference through a conversation about a motorcycle insurance claim that does not exist, but which Bosch is too strategic to walk away from quickly, because walking away from it fast would confirm he has reason to leave the building." Pratt looked at Maddox. Something crossed her face that was almost appreciation. "That's creative." "I've been told to stay within hospital policy," he said. "Your people are not hospital staff. They're having a conversation in a public waiting room," he said. "That's within every policy I'm aware of." She turned to her partner. "Go talk to the man in the waiting room. Don't detain him, just make sure he has a reason to stay put for another 10 minutes. The partner left. Pratt spent 5 minutes going through the documentation bags, with Damon providing annotations, dates, provenance, the chain of custody he had maintained across 12 years and multiple storage locations. She listened with the attention of someone who had spent a career learning to hear the difference between a story and a record. At 6:47, she stepped out of the recovery bay and made a call that lasted 4 minutes. She came back in with a quality of composure that Marisol had learned to read over 6 years of working with doctors under pressure, as the composure of someone who has just confirmed what they expected to confirm, and is now moving into a different operational mode. "Ray Bosch is going to be asked some questions," she said, "in a room that is not a public waiting room." She looked at Maddox. "I'm going to need your cooperation in what happens after this." "You'll have it," he said. "That's not a small ask," she said. "What I'm going to build on this recording and documentation is going to have implications for your organization as well as for Bosch personally." "I know," he said. "Build it anyway." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, picked up the duffel, and walked out. The first confrontation happened in the waiting room, and it was not what Marisol had expected, which was everything she had imagined being loud was quiet, and everything she had imagined being quick took time. She was not in the waiting room when Pratt's partner approached Bosch. She knew because Ike texted her a running description, and because Torres, who was apparently more observant than his size suggested, sent a voice memo that she listened to in the supply room with her back against the shelves. Bosch had been sitting with Maddox's man discussing the motorcycle insurance claim, an increasingly detailed conversation about a make and model of bike that didn't exist, and a policy number that produced no record. When Pratt's partner came and introduced himself with a quiet sentence and a credential case, Torres reported that Bosch's expression did not change immediately. It changed about 3 seconds later, which was the time it took for him to process what was happening and decide how to respond. He chose to respond by being cooperative. He stood up, thanked Maddox's man for the conversation. Torres said the courtesy of this was genuinely impressive, and he understood in that moment why the man had fooled everyone for so long. And he walked with the agents toward the administrative conference room on the ground floor that Pratt had arranged to use. The door closed. He didn't come back out for 40 minutes. Marisol used the 40 minutes to write her incident report. She sat at the nursing station with the incident report form open on the hospital system, and she wrote it in plain language, without softening or spinning, with the specific care she brought to difficult documentation. She noted the time she first observed the tattoo. She noted the decision to photograph it and her rationale. She noted the patient-disclosed address and the rationale for retrieving the storage contents. She noted every step of the decision chain, from 11:47 p.m. to 6 a.m., with the dates and times and the logic she had used at each step. She noted at the end that she understood these actions may have violated patient privacy protocols, that she had made each decision with full awareness of that possibility, and that she stood by each decision as made. She submitted it to the nursing director's queue, which would hit the inbox at 7 a.m. when the day shift director came in. Then she went to find Maddox. He was outside the recovery bay in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, not looking at his phone, just existing in the corridor in the particular way of someone who has been waiting for a long time and has made peace with the waiting. She stood beside him, not across from him, beside him, also against the wall facing the same direction. "Pratt's in the conference room with Bosch," she said. "I know." A pause. "Your son told you everything," she said. It was not a question. "He did." A pause. The gathering in 2012. The woman who was killed. The conversation he recorded. Another pause, this one longer. "He told me why he didn't come to me directly." She didn't respond to that. He was working through something, and the worst thing she could do was direct it. "He thought I'd choose Ray," Maddox said. "He was 22, and he thought after everything, after the life we'd built, after 14 years of Ray being the person I trusted most, he thought I'd choose Ray over a story he was telling me, with no evidence." He stopped. He wasn't wrong to think that. That's the thing. He wasn't wrong. "He built the evidence so you wouldn't have to choose without it," she said. 12 years, Maddox said. The words had a specific gravity. "He's 34, she said. "He has time." They stood in the corridor for a moment with that. The hospital was shifting into the morning rhythm, the sounds of the day shift beginning to layer over the quieter textures of the night carts, moving a distant phone, the distant hum of the ventilation system that she had stopped hearing years ago and heard now. "He asked about you," Maddox said after a moment. "Damon. While you were gone to the storage facility, he asked what you were like." He paused. "I told him you were the most deliberate person I'd met in a situation that required deliberateness." She was quiet for a moment. "What did he say?" "He said he'd picked the right nurse's wing to crash in front of." She laughed, an actual laugh, brief and genuine, the kind that happens when exhaustion loosens the things you've been holding in place. It surprised her a little. It seemed to surprise Maddox too, but not unpleasantly. The confrontation with the hospital administration happened at 9 a.m., which was when the nursing director, Patricia Hollis, called Marisol into the third-floor conference room with the VP of Nursing and the Patient Privacy Compliance Officer. This was the moment she had been carrying since 1 a.m. She walked into it with the same quality of readiness she brought to a code. Everything she could prepare had been prepared, and what remained was to be present and precise. She sat down. She set a printed copy of her incident report on the table. Hollis had the report already. She had read it on her tablet before Marisol arrived, which Marisol could tell from the quality of her expression, which was complicated rather than simply angry. "Walk me through the decision at approximately 12:50 a.m. when you photographed the patient's identifying mark," Hollis said. Marisol walked her through it. She spoke clearly and without deflection. She explained the secondary mark, what it indicated based on her prior knowledge, why she believed the information needed to reach a specific individual rather than law enforcement directly, and what she had assessed the risks to be in either direction. The compliance officer was taking notes. The VP of Nursing was listening with the specific attention of someone building toward a formal determination. "And the storage facility retrieval," Hollis said. She walked through that as well. "You acknowledged to yourself at the time of the decision that both actions could result in professional consequences," Hollis said. "Yes." "And you proceeded?" "Yes." Hollis looked at the VP of Nursing. A communication passed between them that Marisol could not fully read. "The outcome," Hollis said, "is that a federal investigation has recovered material evidence a patient who was in active danger within this facility has been protected, and the threat to that patient has been removed by federal law enforcement rather than by any action taken by staff outside their professional scope." "Yes," Marisol said. "The violations of patient privacy protocol are real and documented." "Yes, ordinarily a violation of this nature would initiate a formal review process and could result in suspension pending investigation." Hollis looked at the table. "However, the formal review process in this case will involve the patient himself, who has already submitted a written statement waiving his privacy rights with respect to the photographed image, and the storage facility retrieval backdated to the time of the actions. She looked up. He appears to have submitted that statement within 20 minutes of regaining adequate cognition post-surgery, which suggests he was also thinking about this outcome. Marisol let that information settle. "You're going to be placed on administrative review," Hollis continued. "Not suspension, review. During the review period, which will last approximately 2 weeks, you will be on day shift rather than night shift while the investigation is conducted. At the end of the review, the compliance office will determine whether further action is warranted." She paused. "The nursing director's office will be submitting a parallel recommendation that the review take your demonstrated clinical judgment, patient outcomes, and the documentation quality of your incident report into account." It was not a clean outcome. It was not the outcome she had most feared, either. It was the outcome of a complicated situation assessed by people trying to do their jobs honestly. "Thank you," she said. "Don't make me do this again," Hollis said with a tone that was not entirely without humor. "I'll try," Marisol said, which was honest. She walked out of the conference room into the hallway, and the day shift was fully running around her, and she stood still for a moment in the middle of it. Her shift had technically ended at 7 a.m. She had been in the building for 10 hours past that point. She needed to go home, and she needed to sleep, and she needed to eat something that was not vending machine peanut butter crackers. She went back to the recovery bay first. Damon was asleep, genuine sleep, the kind his body had been demanding since surgery, and which he had refused until the situation was resolved enough. His color was better. His monitors were steady. The day shift recovery nurse gave Marisol a look that contained questions she was clearly too professional to ask directly. Colt Maddox was not in the recovery bay. She found him in the family waiting area at the end of the recovery wing, sitting in one of the sage green chairs, looking at his phone. He stood when she came in, with the reflexive movement of someone whose body has been on alert long enough that the alert response has become automatic. "How did it go?" he said. "Administrative review, day shift for 2 weeks, no suspension." She sat in the chair across from him, which was not something she had planned to do, but her feet had made the decision independently. He sat back down. "Could have been worse." "Could have," she agreed. He looked at his phone, then set it face down on the chair arm. "Damon's going to be here for at least a week," he said, "medically. And then we need to figure out the after." "The after is a big category," she said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "I have people who need to know what Ray did. That conversation is going to happen in the next 24 hours inside the organization, and it's not going to be simple." "No," she said. "There are going to be people who don't believe it immediately, people who knew Ray for 20 years. People rarely believe it immediately," she said. "When the person is someone they trusted." He looked at her. The gray-green eyes were doing something that was not the controlled assessment of the night, something less guarded or guarded differently from a different direction. "I know why you did it," he said. "The call, the photograph, all of it. I don't think you did it for us." "I didn't," she said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I'd made a decision about what I was going to do when that situation came up." "When did you make that decision?" 4 years ago, in a parking lot." She thought about whether to explain, and decided it was the kind of morning that had earned a real answer. "I had a patient who died during a shift where I knew something was wrong, and I followed protocol instead of my instinct. And I told myself afterward that I would not do that again, that the rules were there for good reason, and I would follow them right up to the edge of the thing that mattered most. And at that edge, I would do what needed doing, and accept whatever came after." He was quiet for a moment. "Did you tell yourself what accepting whatever came after would actually feel like?" "No," she said. "I'm figuring that part out now." A pause. The sounds of the hospital moved around them. Cartwheels, a page overhead, the distant sound of a phone ringing twice and being answered. "I want to be honest with you," Maddox said. "All right? I'm not a person who, the life I've lived, is not one that lends itself to normal things, whatever that means to most people. I don't have a lot of experience with—" He stopped. He seemed genuinely at a loss, which she suspected was rare, with people who make the call that you made for the reason you made it, who aren't doing it because they want something from us. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I'm trying to—" He paused again. "I'm trying to say something, and I don't have the right words for it." "Take your time," she said. "I've been awake for 31 hours, and I'm not going anywhere for another 5 minutes." He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not the infrastructure failing, not the mask dropping, but the deliberate setting aside of a tool he'd been using for a long time that he didn't need in this particular room. "I'd like to come back here," he said. "When Damon is recovered enough that I can leave the building, I'd like to come back and have a conversation that doesn't happen in a hospital." "What kind of conversation?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's why I'd like to have it." She looked at him for a moment. She was aware of being very tired and very awake simultaneously, which was a state she was familiar with from long shifts, the particular clarity that exhaustion produces in the last hour before the body insists on its due. "There's a coffee place on Indian School Road," she said. "It opens at 7. If you're still in Phoenix in a week, I'll be there on Thursday morning." He looked at her. "What time?" 7:15, she said. "I take my coffee with 1 sugar and without anyone telling me what I should or shouldn't have done." Something moved through his expression that was close to a smile and deliberate about not quite being one. "I can work with those terms." She stood up. He stood up. She looked at him in the morning light coming through the window at the end of the family waiting area, which was the flat, clear light that Phoenix produces after sunrise in February, before the heat arrives, when the sky is the kind of blue that makes everything look like it has just been washed. "Your son is going to be all right," she said. "The numbers are good, and Dr. Ochoa doesn't give good numbers when she doesn't mean them." "I know," he said. "Thank you for that. For all of it." She started to say something professionally appropriate, and then didn't, because she was off her shift, and it was 7 a.m., and she had earned the right to say the true thing. "I'm glad he made it to the right bay," she said. She walked out of the family waiting area and down the corridor and through the main doors and into the parking lot, where her car was sitting exactly where she had left it 30-some hours ago. She sat in it for a moment without starting the engine. The seat was cold, and the steering wheel was cold, and through the windshield the sky was the blue she had noticed through the window, real and enormous, and the specific color of a day that was just beginning. She started the car. The federal case against Ray Bosch was not fast, because federal cases rarely were, and Damon Maddox had built the documentation for an audience that knew how to move carefully through legal architecture. Agent Pratt called Marisol 3 weeks after that night to ask 2 follow-up questions about the timeline of her observations, and the call was professional and brief. And at the end of it, Pratt said, with the same even competence she'd brought to the recovery bay, "The audio authentication came back definitive. Thank you for getting the bag out when you did." The administrative review at the hospital concluded 14 days after it began. The compliance office determined that while the patient privacy violations were real and documented, the patient's retroactive waiver, the clinical judgment demonstrated in the documentation, and the outcome of the situation were material factors. The recommendation was a formal note in her file and a requirement to complete an additional training module on privacy protocols. She was moved back to nights. Hollis told her this in person, and at the end of the meeting said, "Don't make me do this again," in exactly the same tone as the first time. And Marisol said, "I'll try," in exactly the same tone, and they understood each other. She went to the coffee place on Indian School Road on Thursday morning. She arrived at 7:10 and got a table by the window and ordered coffee with 1 sugar and looked at her phone until she became aware of someone coming through the door and put her phone away. Maddox sat down across from her. He was wearing a different jacket, not the dark one from the hospital, something lighter, which she noticed with the part of her brain that cataloged small changes. He had the quality of someone who had slept, eventually, and the quality of someone who was carrying slightly less weight than the last time she'd seen him, though still quite a lot. "How is he?" she said. which he knew was the first thing to ask. "Good," Maddox said. "Better every day. We have a lot to work through." He paused. "He asked about you." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were getting coffee on Thursday morning, and I would pass along any messages." He looked at her. He said, "Tell her that next time she doesn't need to go alone." She thought about the parking lot and the SUV and the specific quality of that 4-minute drive, with her hands at 10 and 2 and the bag in the trunk. "Next time," she said. "I'm going to try to arrange things so that there isn't a next time." "Good plan," he said. "Unlikely to work." "No," she agreed. "Probably not." The morning light was coming through the window in the flat, clear way of a February morning in Phoenix that was moving toward warmth without having arrived yet. The coffee was good. She drank it with 1 sugar, and she looked at the man across from her, who was looking at her with the specific quality of someone who had decided that the tools they had been using for a long time were not the right ones for this particular room. "Ask me something," she said. He looked at her. "What?" "You said you wanted to have a conversation, so ask me something." A pause. The corner of his mouth moved in the way it had moved in the family waiting room. Not quite a smile, deliberate about not quite being one. "Okay," he said. "Tell me about the rule you made in the parking lot." She set her coffee down. She looked out the window at the street where the morning was moving at the particular Phoenix pace of February, unhurried, clear the sky, doing that thing it did before the heat arrived, when everything seemed very vivid and very possible. She told him,